My name has been changed to protect my family, and my city as well, but everything I am about to tell you here is the absolute truth. Every detail, every demon's name, every ritual, every woman I destroyed. For 14 years, I was an instrument of darkness, and the mission entrusted to me, the one that still haunts my nightmares even after my deliverance, was to bind women's wombs to river spirits so they could never carry a child to term. My name is Mohammed, I'm 30 years old today, and the man you see before you, this man who can finally look at a pregnant woman without feeling that demonic urge to destroy what she carries in her womb, this man did not exist 3 years ago. 3 years ago, I was still active in the darkness. 3 years ago, I was still receiving missions. Today, I am free, but freedom comes at a price, and that price is the truth. That is why I am speaking, that is why I am in front of this camera, because somewhere right now, a woman is weeping over her third miscarriage. Somewhere, a couple is being torn apart because doctors can find no explanation for their infertility. Somewhere, a mother prays every night to conceive, unaware that someone in the spiritual realm has already decided she will never bear a child. I know this because I was that man, I was the one making that decision, but for you to understand how I reached this point, I must go back to the beginning. I must take you to Catiola, a village in northern Côte d'Ivoire, where it all started. I was born into a family of traders. My father sold cocoa and coffee to buyers coming from the city. We weren't rich, but we lacked nothing. I grew up watching my father work hard, rising before dawn, negotiating with buyers, counting his cash in the evening, and I wanted to be just like him. I wanted to succeed in business. At 20, I left Catiola to settle in Bouake. It was the second largest city in Côte d'Ivoire and, at the time, a major commercial hub. I started small. I bought cocoa from farmers in the surrounding villages and resold it to wholesalers. The early years were tough, competition was fierce, Lebanese buyers controlled a large share of the market. As for me, a young man with no connections and little capital, I was barely scraping by. Yet, during those years in Bouake, I learned the trade. I learned to weigh cocoa and to gauge the quality of a bean simply by cracking it open between my fingers. I learned to negotiate with farmers arriving from the villages before dawn, their jute sacks piled high on ox-drawn carts. I learned patience, because in the cocoa trade, patience is the supreme virtue. Though patience has its limits when hunger comes knocking at your door. Everything changed when I was 25. I had 5 years of experience in the business, yet my trade was stagnating. I watched other merchants, some who had started after me, rapidly gaining ground. They were buying trucks and building warehouses, while I remained stuck with my small, at my market stall, counting up my meager profits at the end of each week. One of my suppliers, a man I called Papa Yao, took notice of me. He saw that I was working hard, yet the results weren't following. One day, after a transaction, he told me something I would never forget. He said that in this country, hard work alone wasn't enough. He told me that those who truly succeeded had something extra, protection, backing, something white people didn't understand but Africans had known about for generations. I laughed. I told him I didn't believe in such things. I had grown up in a Muslim family, and although my mother sometimes consulted traditional healers, I considered myself a modern, rational man. Papa Yao didn't press the issue that day, but in the weeks that followed, he began telling me stories of traders who had turned their small stalls into empires, stories of men who had started with nothing and now owned buildings in Abidjan, and every time, he ended with the same phrase. He said those men had agreed to be protected. 3 months later, my business suffered a devastating blow. An entire batch of cocoa I had bought on credit turned out to be infested with pests. Buyers refused to take it. I lost all my capital. I was in debt. Men came to my home every day demanding their money. My wife wept. My children went hungry. It was in that moment of despair that I called Papa Yao. He told me to come see him the next morning before sunrise. When I arrived at his place, he wasn't alone. There was another man, an elderly, thin man with eyes that seemed to see right through you. He wore traditional clothing and amulets around his neck and wrists. He was the marabout. His name was Baba Siddiqui. He came from a village near Korhogo, in the north, and when he looked at me, he said something that made my blood run cold. He told me he knew why I had come. He said he saw the debt hanging over me like a black shadow, and that he could make that shadow disappear, but that everything had a price. I asked him, how much? He told me he wasn't talking about money. He said the spiritual world doesn't operate with banknotes. He told me that to receive, one must give, and that I would understand later what it was I had to give. That day, Baba Siddiqui took me to a riverbank about a 2-hour drive from Buake. It was a secluded spot, surrounded by dense forest. The water was black and still, and even in broad daylight, there was a heaviness in the air, as if the sun couldn't reach that place. He made me sit by the water's edge. He took objects out of his bag that I had never seen before: dried roots, powders of various colors, blackbird feathers, a small round mirror framed in leather, and a vial containing a dark red liquid. He began to speak in a language I didn't understand. It wasn't Daula or Baul, nor any language I had ever heard. It was something ancient, something profound, and as he spoke, I saw the river water move, not the way the wind would move it. The water stirred from within, as if something beneath were answering his voice. He asked me to place my hands in the water. I hesitated. Something inside me screamed not to do it. It was like an alarm sounding in my chest, yet the thought of my debts, my starving children, and my weeping wife was stronger than that alarm. I plunged my hands into the black water. The moment my fingers touched the surface, I felt something rising up along my arms. It wasn't water, it was alive. It was cold and alive, like hundreds of tiny, invisible snakes slithering up beneath my skin. I tried to pull my hands away, but I couldn't. It was as if the water were holding me, as if hands beneath the surface were gripping my wrists. My whole body began to tremble, not from cold, but from something else, as if every cell in my body were reacting to what was entering me. I heard a low, deep sound coming from beneath the water. It wasn't a human sound, it was a vibration that resonated in my bones, my chest, and my skull, and for a moment, I saw something in the water, a shape, neither human nor animal, something in between, eyes staring back at me from the depths, cold, yellow eyes. Baba Siddiqui poured the red liquid into the water around my hands. The water instantly turned hot, almost boiling, and the shape beneath the surface drew closer. I could feel its presence the way one feels the sun on one's skin, except this presence was the opposite of the sun. It was cold and hungry, and then he spoke a sentence I will never forget. He said that the spirit of the river accepted my offering. He said that from then on, the river would work for me, but that I had to feed the river. When he finally let me pull my hands away, they were trembling, and I had red marks on my wrists that looked like burns. Those marks faded after a few days, but what had entered me would not disappear so easily. The results were immediate. The following week, a buyer I had never met contacted me to purchase cocoa at a price above market value. Within a month, I had paid off all my debts. In 3 months, I had doubled my capital. In 6 months, I owned my own warehouse. Money was coming in from everywhere. Opportunities appeared as if by magic. Contracts fell from the sky. But Baba Siddiqui kept coming back to see me, and with every visit, he reminded me that the river had to be fed. At first, the sacrifices were simple: chickens, goats, and libations of milk and honey poured into the river. I did it without questioning it too much. I told myself it was a small price to pay for the prosperity I was enjoying. Then the demands changed. A year after my initiation, Baba Siddiqui came to see me with a grave look on his face. He told me that the river spirit was satisfied with my offerings but wanted more. He said that to reach the next level of prosperity, I had to start making what he called transfers. He explained that every human being possesses a vital energy, and that the most powerful vital energy of all is the one that creates life, fertility. He told me that the river spirit fed on fertility, that every prevented pregnancy, every bound womb, every child who would never be born, he said it fueled the river's power, and that this power would translate into prosperity for me. I must be honest with you, When he told me this, I hesitated. For days, I didn't sleep. The idea of taking a woman's fertility, of preventing a child from being born, revolted me. But Baba Siddiqui was patient. He showed me what I could become. He took me to see men who had reached that level, men who owned entire plantations, fleets of trucks, houses in Abidjan and Paris, respected men, powerful men, and the temptation was stronger than my conscience. The first woman I targeted was the wife of a rival, a man who was competing with me for the best cocoa lots in the region. Baba Siddiqui gave me a fetish, a small object wrapped in red cloth containing roots, river soil, and hair. He told me to place this fetish under this woman's bed, or in her yard, or somewhere she would regularly pass by. I paid a donut vendor who knew the woman to place the fetish in her yard, hidden under a stone near the front door. The vendor didn't know what she was doing. She thought it was a protective charm I wanted to give her. 3 weeks later, this woman miscarried. She was 4 months pregnant. The doctors found no explanation. The baby was healthy at the last ultrasound. Everything was normal. And then, suddenly, the baby died inside her. When I heard the news, I felt 2 things at once, a profound horror and a demonic excitement. It was the first time I understood that there was something inside me that wasn't me, something that rejoiced in this woman's suffering, something that was hungry. And that ending was the river spirits. From that moment on, the missions came one after another. Baba Siddiqui gave me names. Sometimes they were women I knew, sometimes they were strangers, sometimes they were the wives of clients who owed me money or of competitors I wanted to weaken. But sometimes the names came directly from the river spirit, and I didn't know these women at all. I remember one particular night. It was about 2 years after my initiation. Baba Siddiqui gave me the name of a woman who lived in Daloa, a town I didn't even know well. He told me that this woman was 5 months pregnant and that the river spirit wanted her. I didn't even ask why. At that point, I didn't ask any more questions. The spirit wanted it, and I obeyed. That night, I took a personal item belonging to this woman, a piece of fabric from her loincloth that Baba Siddiqui had obtained through his network, and went to the riverbank. I recited the incantations, submerged the fabric in the water, and felt the river accept the offering. The fabric was drawn beneath the surface as if a hand were pulling it to the bottom. Days later, Baba Siddiqui confirmed to me that this woman had lost her baby, 5 months pregnant, a boy. The doctors had spoken of placental abruption, a clean and clinical medical term to describe something demonic and filthy. The methods varied depending on the distance and the situation. Sometimes, I had to place a fetish near the woman. This required an intermediary, someone who could approach the victim without arousing suspicion. Sometimes it was a market vendor, sometimes a neighbor, sometimes even a child I paid to leave a small object in the courtyard of the house. Sometimes, I had to recite incantations by the riverbank while holding a piece of clothing or a personal item belonging to the victim. It was the most effective method, common for distant targets. The river spirit knew no geographical limits. It could reach a woman in Abidjan from a river near Bouake. Distance did not exist in the spirit world. Sometimes, in the most potent cases, I had to go to the riverbank at midnight on a Friday, when spiritual power was at its peak, and call the spirit by its name. Those rituals were reserved for the most important targets, the women who were spiritually best protected, the women who prayed, the women who had pastors interceding for them. Because I must tell you something, women who prayed were the hardest to reach. Their prayers created a barrier in the spirit world, like a wall of fire around them. Piercing that wall required extra power. It required those Friday midnight rituals, it required greater sacrifices, and even then, the wall sometimes held firm. I encountered women I could never reach, women whose prayers were so strong, so constant, that the river spirit would retreat, and I can tell you that whenever that happened, Baba Siddiqui was furious, but deep down, in that part of my soul the spirit hadn't completely devoured. I felt a secret relief, a relief I dared not show anyone. And I'm going to tell you something that will shock you. The river spirit had a name. It wasn't a human name. It was a sound, a vibration, something Baba Siddiqui had taught me to utter. And whenever I spoke that name, the water would move. every single time, without exception. The water would answer, I did this work for years, 14 years of destroying pregnancies, 14 years of binding wombs, 14 years of feeding the river with women's pain. I cannot give you an exact number, but I know it involved dozens, perhaps more than 100, women whose fertility I affected. Some suffered repeated miscarriages, some were never able to conceive, some experienced complications so severe they nearly died, and one woman actually did die, from a hemorrhage during a spiritually induced miscarriage. She was 20 years old. Her death haunted me. For weeks, I saw her face in my dreams, but Baba Siddiqui told me it was normal. He said the river spirit needed that life to grow more powerful and that my prosperity would only increase, and it is true that my prosperity grew. Within a few years, I owned 3 warehouses, 2 houses, and a business that generated more money than I could spend. I had become exactly what Baba Siddiqui had promised, but at what cost? Let me first explain exactly how this process worked, because if you understand the mechanism, you can break it. The river spirit is what the Bible calls a territorial spirit. In the spiritual realm, every stream and river constitutes a domain, and within that domain, there is a hierarchy of principal spirits and subordinate spirits. The spirit I was bound to was a principal spirit, an ancient one, and its specialty was human fertility. When I bound a woman's womb, here is what happened in the spiritual realm. The incantation created a link, like an invisible chain, between the woman and the river. This link tethered her reproductive organs to the river spirit. From that moment on, the spirit controlled what happened in her womb. If the woman became pregnant, the spirit could decide to kill the embryo. He did this by sending out what we called rejection waves. It was like a spiritual vibration that caused the woman's body to reject the baby. Doctors call this a spontaneous miscarriage, but there's nothing spontaneous about it. It's a coordinated attack from the spirit world. In other cases, the spirit didn't kill the embryo immediately, it let it grow for a few months to maximize the pain, because the further along the pregnancy is when it's interrupted, the greater the pain, and this pain, this emotional suffering, fed the spirit. The river spirit feeds on the suffering of women, it's its spiritual nourishment. There were also cases where the spirit didn't cause miscarriages, but prevented conception altogether. It closed the womb spiritually. The woman could be in perfect physical health, her medical tests could be normal, her husband could be fertile, but nothing happened. Months, years, nothing. Doctors call this idiopathic infertility. That means they can't find a cause, and I can tell you that in many cases, the cause isn't medical, the cause is spiritual. The cause is a man like me who, somewhere, uttered an incantation by a river. Now, let me tell you about 3 women in particular, 3 stories among dozens, 3 lives I destroyed, illustrating how this spell works. The first, I'll call her Mariam. She was the wife of a cocoa buyer who worked for a large international company. Her husband earned a good living. They had been married for 2 years and were trying to have a child. Baba Siddiqui told me that this man had the necessary contacts to get me into a direct export network, and that if I bound his wife's fertility, the man would be so overwhelmed by marital problems that he would leave his job, and that position would then be available for my contacts. I performed the ritual one Friday evening. I used a piece of Mariam's clothing that I had obtained from a laundress who washed clothes for several families in the neighborhood. 3 weeks later, Mariam had a miscarriage, the first of 5 in 4 years, 5 pregnancies, 5 losses. Each time, the doctors searched for explanations. Each time, they found nothing, and each time, the couple drifted further apart. The husband did indeed lose focus at work. He was demoted and then he resigned, exactly as Baba Siddiqui had predicted. The second wife, I will call her Fate, she had done nothing against me. Her husband was not a competitor, she wasn't involved in my business, but the spirit of the river had demanded it. One evening, during a séance with Baba Siddiqui, the spirit spoke through him and gave the name of this woman, a name I had never heard before. And he said that this woman had to be bound because she was carrying in her womb a future servant of God, a child who, if born, would become a powerful instrument against darkness. That is struck. The spirit didn't just target me for prosperity, it also struck preemptively. It destroyed destinies before they could even begin. It prevented the birth of children who might have become spiritual warriors. It was a long-term demonic strategy, and I was its blind instrument. Fate was never able to conceive during the 6 years I kept that curse upon her. 6 years of infertility, 6 years of consultations, 6 years of prayers that seemed to go unheard, and she didn't know why. She had never met me, she didn't even know I existed. The third woman, I'll call her a Joyce, was the wife of one of my direct rivals. 7 years of infertility, because I had decided to destroy her husband by targeting her. I will tell you her story in detail later, for she is also the one who proves that these chains can be broken. 3 women, years of suffering for each, and dozens of others whose names I don't even know. Women who might be listening to me right now, recognizing in my words the explanation for their own suffering. What hurts me most when I look back is the indifference I had developed. At first, every miscarriage I caused made me suffer. I felt guilt like a knife in my gut. But over time, the river spirit had numbed my conscience. The victims had become numbers, statistics, offerings necessary for my prosperity. I had forgotten that they were women, mothers, human beings who dreamed of holding a child in their arms, and perhaps that is the greatest crime of witchcraft. It is not just what it does to the victims, it is what it does to the sorcerer himself. It steals his humanity, it transforms a man into an instrument, a machine, a conduit of destruction, devoid of soul and conscience. It is for this reason that I speak today, it is for this reason that I break the silence, and I speak to you, you who may be listening right now with tears in your eyes because you recognize your own story in my words. If you see yourself in what I have just said, if you feel in your heart that these words are meant for you, then what follows is for you. Listen closely. If you have experienced unexplained fertility issues, repeated miscarriages with no medical cause, or recurring dreams involving streams or rivers, or if you feel something is blocking your ability to bear a child, I invite you to take part in a powerful act right now. Write in the comments, in the name of Jesus, I break every affliction against my fertility and my offspring. Do not skip this step. Participating in a public declaration is powerful. When you name the assignment and break it alongside other believers, you are waging spiritual warfare, and I can tell you from experience that when hundreds of believers participate and proclaim victory together, those assignments are broken. So, participate now. Write, in the name of Jesus, I break every affliction against my fertility and my offspring. That is why I want to tell you about Destroying Afflictions, a 21-day deliverance protocol. It is a comprehensive system designed to identify and close every spiritual door in your life. This involves 21 days of targeted prayer, 21 days of strategic declaration, and 21 days of systematic deliverance from the 7 major attacks that most frequently afflicted Christians when I was immersed in darkness. This protocol was developed by believers who understand spiritual warfare at the very core of their being. I followed it myself after my deliverance. It was an integral part of my healing process, teaching me to recognize and close all the doors I had personally opened. And for the others, the link is in the description. Don't wait another day. The enemy doesn't wait. Why should you? I remember one woman in particular. I won't use her real name. I'll call her Ajua. She had been married for 7 years and had never been able to have children. Her husband loved her, but the pressure from his family was terrible. In Ivory Coast, a woman who cannot bear children is considered cursed, and her husband's family wanted him to leave her and marry someone else. What Ajua didn't know was that I was the one who had bound her womb. Her husband was one of my direct competitors, a man who bought cocoa in the same area as I did. Baba Siddiqui had told me that the best way to weaken him was to strike at his family, not him directly, but his wife, because when a woman suffers, the husband suffers too. When a household is torn apart by pain, the husband can no longer focus on his business, and that is exactly what happened. Ajua's husband began spending all his money on medical consultations. He took her to Abidjan, then to Ghana, and then to France. He spent vast sums on doctors, treatments, and assisted reproduction. Nothing worked, because doctors cannot cure a spiritual affliction with medicine. Meanwhile, his business was failing, his mind was no longer on trade, he could no longer negotiate effectively, and I bought up his best suppliers, I took his market share, my prosperity grew upon his ruin. That was how the system worked. The river spirit didn't just block fertility, it created a chain of destruction. The wife was suffering, the husband was suffering, the couple was tearing itself apart, their finances were collapsing, and all that energy of suffering flowed back toward the river, which redistributed it to me in the form of prosperity. But I must tell you something important, the spirit of the river did not making no distinction between people. When it was hungry, it would take, and one day, it took from my own home, my wife, whom I had married years ago, whom I loved deeply, and whom I had never targeted with any fetish, began to suffer health problems, unexplained bleeding, abdominal pain, restless nights where she would wake up drenched in sweat. Then, one night, the worst happened, she miscarried. We already had 3 children, but we wanted another, and this pregnancy, which we had awaited with such joy, ended in blood and tears in our bedroom. I rushed her to the hospital. The doctors did what they could. They spoke of complications, of an accident, of one of those things that sometimes happen, but I knew, deep down, in that dark place where the spirit dwelt, I knew exactly what had happened. When I went to see Baba Siddiqui to ask why the spirit had struck my own wife, he looked at me with a cold smile, a smile I will never forget. He told me the river takes what it needs. He told me I could not control whom the spirit attacked. He told me the price of prosperity is losing all control, and then he added something terrible. He said I should be grateful, that the spirit could have taken one of my living children, that my wife had lost a pregnancy, not a child already born, and that this was the river's mercy. Mercy, he used that word, mercy, as if a spirit that kills a baby in its mother's womb were showing compassion. That it was the moment I understood the truth in all its horror. I was trapped. I was not the master of the spirit of the river, I was its slave. I thought I was using the river, but it was the river using me. I was a tool, a conduit through which the spirit fed on human suffering, and now it was feeding even on the suffering of my own family. Everything I had built, all that prosperity, was founded on a lie. The lie that I was in control. I controlled nothing. I had never controlled anything. The years that followed were a silent hell. Outwardly, I was prosperous. I had money, houses, cars, but inside, I was dying. Every night, I had nightmares. I saw babies in the river's black water. I heard them crying, dozens of babies, perhaps hundreds, floating in that dark water, and among them, I saw the baby my own wife had lost. My physical health deteriorated, too. I began to suffer from abdominal pain, pain that came and went without warning. The doctors ran tests on me, scans, an ultrasound, blood work, and everything was normal, yet the pain remained, constant, as if something were gnawing at me from the inside. Baba Siddiqui told me it was the price to pay. He said the human body wasn't meant to harbor a river spirit for so long. He said the spirit was slowly consuming me. My social life fell apart, too. I could no longer look my friends in the eye. I couldn't attend christenings or birth ceremonies without feeling terrible shame. When someone showed me a photo of their newborn, I thought of all the newborns I had prevented from being born. When a pregnant woman walked past me at the market, her hand resting on her round belly, I felt the river spirit stir within me like a dog catching the scent of prey. I couldn't sleep without alcohol anymore. I drank every night to numb the voices, the visions, and the guilt. First chapolo, then palm wine, then imported spirits. My wife would find bottles hidden in my office, in my car, in the warehouse. She didn't understand what was happening to me. She saw a man who had everything yet seemed to be dying inside. She begged me to speak, to tell her what was wrong. But how could I tell her? How could I tell the woman I loved that I had spent 14 years destroying pregnancies, that I had taken the fertility of dozens of women to make money, and that her own miscarriage was the direct result of the pact I had made? Then there were the voices. At night, when alcohol was no longer enough to silence them, I would hear voices, the voices of weeping women, the voices of babies, and the deep, grave voice of the river spirit reminding me that I belonged to it, that I could never leave, and that even death would not set me free because my soul was already promised to the river. I tried to stop 3 times. The first time, I told Baba Siddiqui I didn't want any more assignments. He laughed in my face. He told me no one leaves the pact. He told me the river would kill me if I tried. The second time, I tried to leave Buake. I thought that if I got away from the river, the spirit would lose its hold on me. I went to Abidjan for a month. But the nightmares followed me, and I began having strange accidents. A car nearly ran me over in the street, a staircase collapsed beneath my feet, a fire broke out in the apartment I was renting. Events normal people would call bad luck, but I knew it was the river calling me back to heal. The third time, I turned to religion. I went to see an imam, a great, respected imam from Buake. I told him a simplified version of my story. He told me to pray. He gave me surahs to recite, but when I tried to pray, the words remained stuck in my throat, as if an invisible hand was squeezing my throat every time I tried to speak to God. The river spirit wouldn't let me pray. I started having thoughts of death, not suicide exactly, but this feeling that if I died, it would all stop, the nightmares would stop, the guilt would stop, the river spirit wouldn't be able to use me anymore. It was during this dark period that an event changed my life. My wife had started attending an evangelical church in our neighborhood a few months after her miscarriage. At first, I didn't pay attention. I thought it was her way of coping with the pain, but she was changing. I saw it. She was becoming more serene, more radiant, and the more she prayed, the more uncomfortable I became in her presence, as if the light she carried burned me. She insisted I go at least once, for weeks, for months. Every Sunday she asked, and every Sunday I refused because I knew what would happen to me if I entered a church. The river spirit had shown it to me in my dreams. He had told me that places of worship were dangerous for me, that if a true servant of God touched me, the pact could be threatened. He had even shown me visions of other witches who had entered churches and suffered terribly. Some had gone mad, some had died, but that Sunday, I was so tired, so drained, so broken by alcohol, nightmares, and guilt that I agreed just to please my wife, just to make her stop crying. I told myself I would go, that I would sit in the back, that I would endure hymns and prayers for an hour and that I would go home. One Sunday morning, my wife took my hand and led me to church. When I entered that church, I immediately felt something like a pressure on my chest, as if the very air was pushing me away. People were singing and praising God, and every note of music burned inside me. I was sweating profusely, my hands were trembling. I wanted to leave, but my wife held my arm. The pastor that day preached on Ephesians 6:12. He spoke of the powers of darkness. He spoke of territorial spirits, and then, as if looking directly at me, he said something I will never forget. He said that in that room, there was someone who had made a pact by a river. He said that this person had been chained for years, and he said that Jesus wanted to set them free that day. I felt my whole body froze. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. How did that pastor know? How could he know what I had done by that river years ago? The pastor has asked that person to stand up. He didn't say my name. He didn't point a finger, but I could feel his eyes on me, and something inside me, something beyond my control, made me stand. My legs were trembling. My wife was staring at me wide-eyed, not understanding what was happening. I walked to the front of the church, and when the pastor placed his hand on my head, something happened. It was like an internal explosion. I felt a terrible pain in my gut, as if something were being torn out from within. I screamed, I wept, I fell to the floor, and while I was on the ground, I had a vision. I saw the river, I saw the black water, and I saw a light so brilliant it made the water boil. The river spirit was screaming. It tried to hold on to the chains, but the light was stronger. Chain after chain was breaking, and I heard a voice calling my name, not the name the spirit had given me, but my real name, and that voice said I was free. When I got back up, I was drenched in sweat, my clothes were wet, as if I had been swimming, and I felt something different, a lightness, as if 100-kilogram weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The river spirit was no longer inside me. I could feel it. Its absence was just as real as its presence had been for 14 years. That pastor took me aside after the service. He told me he knew God had set me free, but that the process wasn't over yet. He told me a pact like mine isn't broken in a single day. He told me that the doors I had opened had to be closed one by one, and he gave me a protocol, a 21-day program of prayer, declarations, and the systematic closing of every spiritual door I had opened. The 21 days that followed were the most difficult and the most beautiful of my life. Every day I prayed, every day I declared my freedom, every day a door closed, and every night the nightmares subsided, but it was not an easy process. During the first few days of the protocol, I thought I was going to die. My whole body was shaking, I had a fever, cold sweats, and vomiting. The pastor told me this was normal. He explained that when you close spiritual doors, the spirits that had passed through them put up a fight. They do not want to leave, and their resistance manifests in the physical body. On the third day, I suffered a terrible crisis in the middle of prayer. I fell to the ground, my body contorted, and sounds I could not control poured from my mouth. Guttural sounds, screams, words in that ancient language Baba Siddiqui had taught me. Except this time, it wasn't me speaking, it was the river spirit using my mouth to threaten the intercessors praying for me. It told them to leave me alone, it told them I belonged to it, it told them that if they didn't stop, it would destroy them too. But those intercessors weren't afraid, they prayed with greater intensity, they invoked the blood of Jesus over me, and little by little, the spirit's voice grew faint, like a fire starved of oxygen, until it died out completely. That day, I began vomiting up strange things. I know it sounds impossible, I know rational people won't believe what I'm saying, but I swear before God it is the truth. I vomited things that had no business being in a human stomach, chunks of black matter, threads, things that looked like roots. The pastor told me they were the physical remnants of the fetishes I had consumed during my rituals, things Baba Siddiqui had made me eat or drink, which had remained lodged in my body for years. On the 7th day of the process, I confessed everything I had done to my wife. That was the hardest day of all, harder than the crisis on the 3rd day, harder than the vomiting on the 5th, because I was about to lose the only person who still loved me. I sat her down across from me in our living room. The children were asleep, it was night, and I told her everything, omitting nothing, the fetishes, the river, Baba Siddiqui, the women whose fertility I had destroyed, the market woman, the offering I had used to place the fetish in the courtyard of Ajaz, the 26-year-old woman who had died of a hemorrhage, and the truth about her own miscarriage, the truth that the pregnancy she had lost was not a medical accident, but the direct result of the pact I had made with the river spirit 14 years earlier. I expected her to leave me, I expected her to scream, to strike me, to take the children and go to her mother's and never come back. I would have understood, I would have accepted it, because I didn't deserve her love, not after what I had done. She wept for hours, she wept, silent tears at first, then deep sobs that came from the very depths of her being. She wept for the baby she had lost, she wept for the years of lies, she wept for all those women she didn't know but who had suffered because of her husband. And then she did something that broke me. She dried her tears, she stood up, and she came to sit next to me and she took me in her arms. She held me close like you hold a child who has done something terrible but is still your child, and she told me that God had prepared her for this moment. She told me that she had received a dream weeks earlier where God showed her that her husband was carrying a heavy burden. She told me that deep down she had known something was wrong for years, and she told me that she forgave me, not because what I had done was forgivable, but because Jesus forgives, and if Jesus forgives, then she too could forgive. That night, we prayed together for the first time in our marriage. She laid her hands on my head and prayed with an authority I had never known she possessed, and I felt chains break that I didn't even know I was still wearing. On the 14th day, I did something terrifying. I went back to the river, not alone with the pastor and 3 intercessors from the church. My wife wanted to come too, but the pastor told her to stay home and pray while we were there. The journey to the river was a struggle in itself. My car broke down twice on the way, a tire blew out for no reason, and when we arrived at the forest leading to the river, a storm suddenly broke. The sky had been blue 5 minutes before, and suddenly, black clouds, lightning, a violent wind. The pastor smiled. He told me it was a good sign. He told me the enemy was afraid, and when the enemy is afraid, he makes noise. We walked in the rain to the river, and when I saw it, that black water where I had plunged my hands years before, I felt a deep terror. My whole body wanted to flee. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn back, but the pastor held me. He took me by the arm and told me not to be afraid. He told me that he who is in us is greater than he who is in the world. We went to the edge of that dark water and prayed. The pastor declared the victory of Jesus over the territorial spirit. The intercessors prayed in tongues, and I, on my knees in the mud, renounced aloud every pact, every alliance, every attachment I had ever made by the edge of that river. I named every woman I could remember. I asked forgiveness for every destroyed pregnancy. I asked forgiveness for every bound womb. I asked forgiveness for that 26-year-old woman who had died, and I swear before God that I saw the water move one last time like a final spasm, like a final cry of rage from the spirit that was losing its servant. The water trembled, bubbles rose to the surface, and then suddenly everything was still. The storm stopped. The wind died down, the sun appeared through the clouds, and the river, that black and terrifying river, looked like an ordinary river, just water, just stones, just mud. The spirit was gone when we left that moment. I knew it was over, truly over. I wept the entire way back, not tears of sadness, but tears of relief. The tears of a man who had been in chains for 14 years and was breathing free air for the first time. Yet freedom does not mean an absence of consequences. My business empire collapsed rapidly. Without the river's power, my trade reverted to what it should have been all along, modest, ordinary. I lost 2 of my 3 warehouses. I sold one of my houses to pay off debts. Business associates who had respected me when I was powerful vanished overnight. Men who used to call me Big Brother and come to my home for dinner every week stopped answering my calls. Papa Iao, the man who had introduced me to Baba Siddiqui, came to see me. He told me I had made the biggest mistake of my life. He told me the river does not forgive traitors. He told me I would die within 6 months, and he said it with such certainty, such conviction, that I almost believed him. But the pastor had warned me. He had said that former allies would come to sow fear, and that fear is the enemy's final weapon when he has lost power. I was not afraid, not because I am brave, but because I had seen with my own eyes the power of God shatter the river's pact, and if God could break a 14-year pact, he could certainly protect me from Papa Iao's threats. As for Baba Siddiqui, he vanished overnight. No one in the region knew where he had gone. Some said he had returned to Korhogo, others said he had fled to another country. The pastor told me that this was often the case. When a servant of darkness loses a powerful client, he also loses some of his own power. Baba Siddiqui didn't want to be around when the consequences of that loss caught up with him, but I was sleeping. For the first time in 14 years, I was sleeping without nightmares, without seeing babies in black water, without hearing the weeping of the women I had destroyed, and that peaceful sleep, that blessed silence in my mind, was worth more than all the warehouses and houses in the world. My wife became pregnant again a year after my deliverance. We had a 4th child, a perfectly healthy girl, and when I held her in my arms for the first time, when I felt her small, warm body against my chest, I understood what I had stolen from all those other women. I understood the weight of what I had done, and I wept with gratitude for the second chance God was giving me to know the joy of a newborn. There is one thing I must say before I finish, something that still causes me deep pain. I was never able to find all the women I had harmed. Some had moved away, some had divorced. For some, I knew only their husbands' names, not their own. And that woman who died, that young woman of 26 who suffered a hemorrhage, I could never bring her back. I tried to find her family. I searched for months. but shame and fear had driven them to leave the region. No one knew where they were. I carry the weight of that death on my conscience every day, and I will carry it until the day I die. That is the price I pay, not a price imposed by God, but the natural burden of a life that caused so much destruction. But a Jew, the woman I had targeted because her husband was my competitor, I did find her. It was the 21st day of my protocol, the final day, and I felt in my heart that God was asking me to take this step, to find that woman and then make a confession. I gathered my courage and went to see her husband at the market where he still worked. When he saw me, he smiled. He thought I had come on business. He had no idea I was the one who had destroyed 7 years of his life. I took him aside to a quiet corner, away from prying eyes, and confessed everything to him, the fetish, the fritter cellar, the river, the incantations, everything. His face shifted from confusion to shock, then from shock to rage. He wanted to strike me. He raised his fist, and honestly, I would have deserved every blow, but something held him back. He let his arm drop and wept, a grown man in the middle of the Buick market crying like a child, weeping for his wife's 7 years of suffering, for the nights spent in the hospital, for the money spent on useless treatments, for the arguments, for the humiliations inflicted by his in-laws. He insulted me, called me a monster, and he was right, but when the insults died down, he asked me a question. He asked if it was truly over, if the affliction upon his wife had really been lifted, and I was able to look him in the eye and say, yes, the chain was broken. The affliction on his wife had been lifted during my deliverance ritual. The river spirit no longer held any power over her. 8 months later, I received a message. It was a Joa's husband. He sent me a photo. His wife was pregnant, after 7 years of infertility, 7 years of medical consultations, 7 years of treatment, 7 years of tears. The doctors were astounded. They spoke of a medical miracle. They couldn't understand how a woman diagnosed with unexplained secondary infertility could suddenly conceive without any treatment, but I understood, and I wept that day, tears of joy mixed with remorse, of gratitude mixed with shame. A Joa gave birth to a healthy baby boy, a beautiful 3.5 kilogram boy who, I was crying out at the top of my lungs. 7 years of waiting, 7 years of suffering caused by me, but God restored what I had destroyed. If you are listening to me right now and suffering from unexplained fertility issues, I want you to know something. It might not be a medical problem. The issue might not lie with your body. There may be someone out there who has done exactly what I did. There may be a river spirit, a water spirit, sent against you. I want to explain something that most people don't know. Water spirits aren't limited to rivers. They can be attached to any body of water. A river, yes, but also a well, a lake, a stream, or even a village water source. And the sorcerers who work with these spirits are everywhere. In cities, villages, and residential neighborhoods. Some are respected business people, just as I was. Some are civil servants or hold important positions in society. You might cross paths with them every day without knowing what they do at night, and their victims almost never realize what is happening to them. They struggle on, visiting doctors and undergoing tests. Everything seems normal, yet they continue to suffer. They take hormonal treatments that don't work. They try in vitro fertilization, only for it to fail. They spend a fortune on medical consultations, yet nothing changes because the problem isn't in their bodies, it is in the spiritual realm. But I also want you to know something else. These spirits are not all powerful. They are powerful, yes, but there is a name that is above every other name, and when that name is spoken in faith, when believers gather and declare victory together, those chains are broken. I am living proof of that. Joyce and her son are living proof of this. I remember something the pastor told me during my deliverance process. He said that water spirits are among the oldest and the most tenacious spirits in the spiritual realm. They are mentioned in the Bible. Leviathan is a water spirit, and the dragon in the deep waters is a water spirit. These spirits have a predilection for attacking fertility because fertility is the first blessing God bestowed upon humanity. In Genesis, God's first words to man and woman were to be fruitful and multiply. And it is precisely this blessing that the water spirits seek to steal. They attack what God first blessed. But the pastor also told me something powerful. He told me that deliverance prayers specifically targeting water spirits are different from other deliverance prayers. He said you must name the spirit, identify the type of attack, break the specific bond between the victim and the body of water, and declare God's sovereignty over the waters, because even the waters belong to God, the sea belongs to Him, the rivers belong to Him, and no spirit has the right to rule over what belongs to the Creator. Signs to watch for include repeated miscarriages without medical explanation, infertility that doctors cannot explain, recurring dreams where you see streams, rivers, or black water, dreams where you are submerged in water and cannot breathe, and abdominal pains that appear and disappear for no apparent reason, often at night. The feeling that something is blocking your stomach like an invisible hand pressing on your lower abdomen, a heaviness in the lower abdomen that medical exams don't detect, unexplained bleeding between periods, and also a sign that many people ignore, a sudden and inexplicable aversion to water, women who used to swim and bathe and who suddenly feel terror at the thought of approaching a body of water. This is the spirit manifesting, this is the connection calling her back. If you recognize one or more of these signs, don't stay alone with it. Speak to a pastor who understands deliverance, not just any pastor, but a pastor who has experience in spiritual warfare, a pastor who knows what water spirits are. Find a community of believers who pray with authority, and above all, don't lose hope, because I have seen chains break with my own eyes. I have seen wombs freed. I have seen women who had waited 5, 7, 10 years become pregnant after the deliverance prayer. Each case is a miracle, and each miracle is proof that God is stronger than any river spirit. The spiritual world is real, river spirits are real, fertility spells are real, but Jesus Christ is more real than all of that, and His power is absolute. There is no spirit, no pact, no spell that can resist the name of Jesus when it is proclaimed with faith and authority. Today, I live simply, my business is modest, I sell cocoa on a small scale, as I did in the beginning, before the river, before the darkness. I am no longer rich as I once was. I no longer have 3 warehouses or 2 houses. I have 1 house, just one, and a small business that allows me to feed my family with dignity, but my home is at peace, my wife is by my side, my children are growing up in the light. My daughter, the one born after my deliverance, is now 2 years old, and every time I look at her, I see God's grace. I see living proof that the river lost, and every morning, when I wake without nightmares, when I no longer see babies in the black water, when I no longer hear the weeping of women, I thank God for His mercy, a mercy I do not deserve, a mercy that surpasses all human understanding. I still have difficult moments, moments when the memory of what I did overwhelms me, but the pastor taught me something important. Guilt that comes from God leads to repentance. Guilt that comes from the enemy leads to despair. When I remember my sins and it drives me to bear witness, that is the conviction of the Holy Spirit. When the memory paralyzes me, it is the enemy trying to put me back in chains. I did not deserve to be saved, but that is exactly what grace is. It is not something one earns, it is a gift God offers even to the greatest sinners. If you yourself are involved in practices like those I have just described, I want to speak to you directly. You think you control the situation, you think you are the master, but you are the slave. The spirit you serve will turn against you, it will take from your own home, it will destroy your own family, it will do to your loved ones exactly what you did to the loved ones of others. It is a matter of time, not possibility. I am proof of this. My wife lost a baby because of the very same spirit I used against others. The river makes no distinctions, the river is hungry, and one day, it will hunger for what belongs to you, but it is not too late. If I could be set free after 14 years in darkness, you can be too. A way out exists, and it has a name. That name is Jesus Christ. He alone has the power to break what holds you captive. He alone has the power to close the doors you have opened. I conclude this testimony with a prayer in my heart, a prayer for every woman suffering in silence, a prayer for every couple being torn apart, and a prayer for every man still held prisoner by the spirit of the river. There is a way out. I found it, and it awaits you. May God bless you, and may every chain binding your fertility, your offspring, and your life be broken in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.